Next up, we have a presentation titled Beyond Orality, Digital Preservation in the African Ajami Library. The presentation is being made by Gabe Adugna, Eleni Castro, Rachel Dwyer, all from Boston University. The digital floor is yours.
Thank you, Sonia, and thank you to the conference committee for inviting my colleagues and I to talk with you all about a 10-year collaboration between the libraries and the African Studies Center at our institution. My name is Eleni Castro, and I manage Boston University's institutional repository OpenBU, and I also have had the privilege to work on digital collections and projects such as this. And also, thank you everyone who's still here, and I appreciate that you stayed on all day or joined back. So, to start things off, here is a high-level agenda of what we'll be discussing in the next 40 minutes or so. First off, we'll give a brief introduction on what the African Ajami Library is and what it comprises of. Next, I will talk about our digital collections workflows for the African Ajami Library and how they might differ depending on the partners or collaborators. Next, I will talk about a use case of a digitization project that we did in West Africa. And following that, my colleagues Gabe and Rachel will talk about one that they did in East Africa. And then we will close with what's coming up for the African Ajami Library and other opportunities and challenges that we're encountering. So the best person to introduce you all to this is Professor Falun Gong, who created the African Ajami Library. Since he's not here today, I'm going to play this 3-minute clip of an interview we did with him last fall.
Okay, I'm Falun Gong. I'm a professor of anthropology at Boston University, and I'm also the director of the African Studies Center here at Boston University. The African Ajami Library, as the name suggests, is a library that brings together text written with the modified
Sorry, is anyone able to hear the sound on the video? No, okay.
No, we've lost sound.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so.
It was there before.
It was there before? Okay, hold on. Let me try this. Okay. Apologies for
literacy and intellectual written traditions.
Okay, excellent, excellent.
It began first when the idea began when I was a professor at Western Washington University in Washington State. I had in 2004 discovered documents that were written by my dad, and they turned out to be Wolof. So Wolof written with the Arabic script. And I did not know anything about that tradition. And I thought it was interesting that my dad had passed away. And my dad passed away in February 22nd, 1996. And I discovered some of his writings in 2004. So I communicated with him years after he died through those documents. And so that kind of, made me think that if this is possible with him, because I had regarded him as illiterate, because I was trained in the French system that defined literacy as the ability to read and write in French. So I thought he was not educated. So that triggered my interest, and I applied for the WARC postdoc fellowship, which is the West African Research Association here, hosted at Boston University while I was at Western. So I applied. Yeah, I applied for the WARC postdoc to go study for the first time this an exploration. So when I got that postdoc, I went to Senegal and I began to dig. I found that, in fact, there is an extensive literature written in Ajami, in Wolof, in Mandinka, in Pular, grassroots literacy, shopkeepers. And that kind of really made me realize that there was a whole world that I really didn't know about, a world that was completely rendered invisible by the narratives of oral traditions in Africa.
So back in 2010, when Professor Ngom became faculty here at BU, he reached out to my department. This was years before I started working at BU. And this is within the libraries, and it's now known as the Digital Scholarship Services Unit. And the plan was to create a digital repository for the African Ajami materials that he was just mentioning. And this page just has a link to the African Studies Center page if you'd like to find out more about the research and the work they do. So it was agreed at the time that the African Ajami Library would be hosted on OpenBU, which is our institutional repository that's powered by DSpace, open source software, and mostly has open access articles by BU faculty and BU theses and dissertations. So this was a very unique collection and research project to be added. At the moment, we have over 400 manuscripts, over 31,000 pages from multiple partners and collaborators in sub-Saharan Africa and some in North America as well, and they span several languages and locations. This is a Google map we created which illustrates where all of the manuscripts from the African Ajami Library are from, with the exceptions of a collection of Malagasy manuscripts from Madagascar and the upcoming Amharic Ajami collection from Ethiopia. More on that from Gabe and Rachel in a bit. Most of these collections are from West Africa. Some of the countries within here have multiple languages, such as the Nigerian collections, and some of them we've only been able to digitize from 1 or 2 languages. So I mentioned workflows because although here is one very standard workflow for a project we would do, there are times when we have a partner, collaborator, who will come to us after they've done all this work. So it's, what I'm trying to stress here is that we want to be very flexible and knowing that there are different contexts that these collections might come to us, and they don't all necessarily start with us preparing with the team the digitization guidelines that we would like. So that's what we try to do as much as possible. And now in the next few slides, I'll be talking about a use case of the work we did in West Africa. And these are images that I was able to take because I was able to go there myself of our fieldwork colleagues who tirelessly worked behind the scenes to get these manuscripts into the African Ajami Library. So back in the fall of 2017, Boston University's African Studies Center, with the collaboration of the West African Research Center in Dakar, Senegal, were awarded a 15-month grant by the British Library's Endangered Archives program, supported by Arcadia, to digitize approximately 12,000 pages of manuscripts written in Mandinka Ajami, and this was in Senegal. The location, more specifically, is in Casamance, which is the southern region of Senegal, which is a more wet climate, not as dry as the northern Senegal. The other difference is that northern Senegal is more, the predominantly spoken language there is Wolof, whereas in the south, Mandinka is more common. And so the principal investigator, Falun Gong, and the local project team had gone a year before and even years before that to set up connections within these communities and trust so that we could work with them to digitize these materials. This isn't something that we just went and we were able to digitize right just by knocking on someone's door. It's a lot of work. And the red boxes below show you the regions and the cities that we went to do the field work. So with the exception of myself, the rest of the project team and partners, including the principal investigator, are of Senegalese descent. The West African Research Center provided us, while we were in Senegal, with a home base logistical assistance, and a space to provide our training and workshop. Here's a picture of our partners from WARC and the project team after we completed a 3-day digitization and preservation training there. Here is a timeline for the project, which can be grouped into about 4 phases. And I'll go into those in a bit within the next few slides, but it should be important to note here, I won't go into each of these right now, but I initially said 15 months, but 15 months really ended up just being to do the digitization and setup work. And the 24 months ended up being the post-processing and uploading the materials. And so we ended up digitizing way more than we had thought we were going to. And that's why the timeline got stretched. So in phase 1, as we prepared for our trip, we tested photographing in various locations with different light conditions. And as Rachel may mention later, it's really hard to exactly mimic the field conditions. Portability and budget were key criteria for us, as well as checking with the British Library's Endangered Archives program to make sure what we selected fit their grant requirements for this project. And I have a link if you'd like to see the full list of equipment and technology that we used. In phase 2, as I briefly mentioned earlier, we went to Dakar, Senegal, at our partners in the West African Research Center to provide this training. And the grant stipulated that all the equipment would stay in the host country after we finished the work. And so we also had invited colleagues from the West African Research Center to participate in the workshop, since they would be using this equipment in the end to support their own future digitization projects. In phase 3, hold on, let me play this video. This is a video of all the manuscript owners and their families that we visited during the field work. So phase 3 was really digitization and conducting informational interviews to get the provenance and the context behind all of these materials. And I really want to stress that the manuscript owners were the ones that selected the manuscripts. They were the ones that provided the metadata for us through the interviews, and they granted us a license and were financially compensated per page. And this was from the grant money allowed us to be able to do this. In phase 4, lastly, Professor Ngom and I worked on converting the files from the Nikon NEF format to TIFF. And in the end, we digitized 18,000 pages, 220 manuscripts, and 58 collections, way over what we had initially stipulated. And we made, as the grant asked us to do, we distributed 3 complete digital copies internationally. We sent the master files to our local host country, WARC Senegal, and WARC, which is in Senegal. We sent to the British Library, our funding agency, a copy as well, and a copy stayed with the principal investigators, the host institution, so Boston University. What kinds of manuscripts did we find? They spanned from ancient and modern texts, secular, non-secular, histories of towns, villages, correspondences with family in the diaspora, poetry, documents outlining Islamic practices, so more pedagogical texts teaching people how to do certain Islamic rituals and prayers. So it just spans everything. But some of the patterns that we noticed were, a lot of them were multilingual texts. Many had Mandinka and Arabic all within the same document. We also found several with really gorgeous illustrations, and here's one of a mosque as well. Another unique finding was the living documents. So we found some that you could tell from, there was a watermark that showed that it was 18th century paper, and you could tell by the ink that it was fading, and then you would see annotations around the marginalia that had more modern looking ink or pen. So this was some of the things that we found. I'd like to play a very short clip to demonstrate that these manuscripts aren't just meant to be read, some of them, they're also meant to be sung or chanted. And this is from a video interview with a manuscript owner, Abdul Kader Cisse, and his brother, Sharif Cisse, being interviewed by our fieldwork team member, Ibrahima Yafa, who's in the white caftan.
اللهم يا ربي صل على محمد اللهم يا ربي صل على محمد.
All right, and so some of the technical challenges and lessons that we learned. For the sake of time, I won't be able to go into each point here, but luckily most of the following technical challenges we encountered were resolved early on in the fieldwork while I was still in Senegal. The last one was more at the post-processing stage when I tried to upload the files into our repository and encountered issues with uploading. We had some manuscripts that were over 1,000 pages, so 1,000 images, and DSpace doesn't seem to like uploading for one item that many files, so we had to figure out some workarounds with those challenges. Now I will pass this over now to Gabe and Rachel, who will be speaking with you about their recent work digitizing manuscripts in East Africa.
Thank you, Eleni. Hello, everybody. My name is Gabe Adugna. I am liaison and subject librarian at the Boston University Libraries, African Studies. My fellow African Studies librarian, Rachel, and me are going to talk about the latest and recent mission to eastern part of Africa, specifically to Ethiopia. Immediately after me, my colleague Rachel will provide information about the budget and logistic preparation, as well as the actual digitization work on two sides. The interesting stuff to this audience, I believe. Then my talk will focus on the context and the background of the mission. Meaning how it came about, the phase it went through, and finally what has been accomplished, as well as the lessons learned. I hope you will draw some lessons from this story that you're going to hear from me. Now, in terms of context and background, the few basic things to know about this mission is, first, especially compared to the previous works which were done on the western part, the first one is the scale. This mission was relatively very small, and actually we were tasked to do about 1,000 pages, and the budget was also very, compared to other, it was a very small one. And then the other, it also in terms of time, it was done relatively in a short time. So it's like a pilot. It was done during just the winter break, within less than 1 month. Another second thing to know about this mission is it's one moment. Yes, the second one is, most of the work was done without actual active participation from local institutions. As maybe you've heard from Eleni, that the West African Research Institute, or the West African Research Center, or WARC, was actively participated on the western side. The partners and their staff were actively involved with it, especially the work there. But in our case, there was no local institution. And then I'll explain a little bit more about that. I think when I go into details. The third item, which is kind of, compared with the other thing, is this is a mission actually which was initially conceived as a scouting mission. It's but which turns into actual digitization mission. And then because some circumstances allow that. And maybe I will, again, on that one, I will maybe provide some details. So on how to start or how it came about. Actually, it started from from very casual conversation that I had with Professor Falun Gong, and this was around the time that I started working there. And so when I think we were having lunch, and then he says he was always curious about whether the Ajami tradition exists in Ethiopia. I'm originally from Ethiopia, and then but I'm from the Christian family background. And then I told him I do not know whether this this is the first time actually I'm hearing that Muslims say they are using to Arabic texts, because Ethiopia has its own written tradition and different texts, which I will explain also a little bit later on. So at that time, what I told him is I do not know, but I can find out. And then I also added, if it exists, I suspect it will be in Harar, which you see in the map on the on the red, marked the red. Harar being one of the holiest center for Islamic scholarship, and that work. And I know about the Emir has a huge library, the last Emir, and so then I said, okay, in that library there might be. But there is also another place that I thought would be maybe they would have this kind of materials is Jimma. Maybe you don't see it. It's in the lower bottom corner, because that was a very rich king of that sultanate, was very wealthy. It's a wealthy sultanate, which was in trans-Saharan trade. It's a trade post for trans-Saharan, which starts from Senegal and goes all the way to East to Red Sea. So, and then the other thing to know about that question was, I think when I left, I said, well, he told me, you have your time, just whatever you can find out, you can bring it to me. So I took it as a librarian, I took it just as a long reference question, an ongoing reference question that I can work in between other immediate tasks. So, and then after some time, I found, as a typical librarian, I went back to him with a list of references about what I was able to find, all the kind of studies which I've done about those things. And then, but when I took that to him, he said, well, this is good, but what I'm interested is, I want to know if those manuscripts, where those manuscripts are, especially if they are in private hands, and who will be the partners to work with in order to digitize those materials. So once I heard that, that changed the whole dynamics to it. So I promised again, maybe I can help on that also. So I started inquiring around. I contacted some of my contacts from Ethiopia who have been written about this. And then also I met some from at the African Studies Association meeting in Chicago, some of the people who wrote actually on this issue. And during this talk and the studies I looked now, what makes it very, there is one region which is coming again and again, not the places that I thought would be. That's the one which is marked on the yellow. So it's the Wollo region. So the Wollo region is very, essential for Islamic scholarship, especially this Ajami. And then there's also Manzuma, what they call Manzuma. They write, these are chants, but they are written in Arabic text, and everybody wants to work that. And so with that, I started again contacting these people, trying to find some partners in Wollo. But around this time,
Gabe, this is Sonia. I'm just going to ask you to speak a little bit closer to a microphone.
Okay. Sorry about that. Can you hear me now? Yes,
much better.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So around this time, actually one of our faculty from African Studies Center was in Ethiopia. He's in charge of developing partnership, And so he was there actually to renew a memorandum of understanding, MOU, between Addis Ababa University and Ethiopia, and other research interest also he has. So when he came back and he told us, okay, actually he found a scholar who is also doing research on Ajami in Ethiopia. Not only him, but all his students are also doing a lot of research on Ajami. So that kind of, and then we started really corresponding with this faculty. He was interested, and he says, but after some time, that communication really stopped, and it didn't progress much. So I have to go back to the plan again and trying to find other contacts or other leads where they can take us. So it was at this time actually that accidental meeting in one of a community gathering here of Ethiopians here in Washington, DC. I found a local resource person. This person was, I hope he's attending today, was very, very helpful. First of all, he knows the subject. He's from the Wollo region. He used to be a Muslim, a head of a local mosque and a scholar on the other thing. So once we found out that, and then he promised also to help us. He can provide also some connections in the country. So then we came back and we met with Professor Falun Gong, and then we planned now a scouting mission. No, I was planning actually scouting mission before that, and but once we found this person, I consulted with my African Studies Library, the branch library. There are only 3 of us, and now it seems like we can do even actual digitization work instead of scouting. So, and then the reason I brought that was I was not sure about our capability, because normally this kind of work used to be done by Digital Scholarship Unit in collaboration with African Studies Center. The unit, Eleni works most of the thing. So this is really new to us, and I was not sure whether we have the ability, the capability. But when we consulted, the other thing is, the Digital Scholarship Unit, they need a little bit longer time for planning and everything. But I already have a ticket, and so when I consulted my branch, they said, I think we can do it, and we can, And then Eleni was kind enough. She trained us. I think she provided a lot of guidance about previous projects and everything. So that's how it came to digitization mission. And so with that, I like next we can go to the. Okay. So our field mission started there, and one interesting thing there is the day I arrived actually in Ethiopia, the local institution from Addis Ababa University, the scholars, then contacted me, after a long time, after long silence, and then they say, oh, they're ready to help. But I told them, we have found other partners and everything, but still, they were very, very, very helpful in contacting and providing us a lot of helps. But they asked us, where is that place? It's sad that we were not able to identify places or the sites with them. But we have already identified with our local partner, with his connection. And the place we went is, you see the map, it's called Bahar Dar, 2 sites we were.
I'm going to have to ask you to sit forward again.
Okay.
We're having sound issues when you're not close.
Oh.
There we go. Thank you.
I'm sorry again. So once we arrived there, it's one of the things, very interesting story here is almost all the Ajami scholars that I talked to, and the studies mostly point to Wollo. But Bahar Dar is the capital of the Amhara region, where Wollo is also located. But nobody thought there would be some Islamic manuscripts or Ajami manuscripts in that area, because it's a very Christian-dominated area. So, but the only person who was telling us, you can start there, and then I can find you, materials and the manuscripts there, was our local, the person that I met, Mohammed Joab, that I met in Boston. So, and then that's where also, where we meet our local coordinator that he has arranged. So we went there, and the most important, the very interesting thing is, almost all 1,000. We never thought we will go to the one law and everything, but we found all the 1,000 page. That's what we have done. And for the details, I think actually two places, Bahar Dar and a small town called Hamusit, not far from that. For the details, I think maybe Rachel will talk about that. Next slide. So here I'm going to talk about a little bit, what has been, accomplished, or what is this mission has proven, and the lessons learned. The first thing that this mission has proven is that Ethiopia is beyond doubt that the Ajami tradition is very, very rich, and that there's so many, as I said, even in places like, we never thought we would find, scholars thought, we'd never find, we were able to find all those 1,000. So that tells you that's the tip of the iceberg. The one we found is just, a small item. But if we go to the major places like Wallo or Harar and Jima and other places, there's so many. So beyond doubt now, we were sure, there is big work to be done there. The other important thing, I think, I'm not a Ajami scholar, but I always said, since we have gone there, what became very clear is, Ethiopia brings complexity to the field, meaning especially having different scripts in that, right in Wallo itself. Wallo is a very melting pot of culture, religion, and everything. There are 4 languages. And the Ajami tradition in Wallo, one of its dying language and everything. But the script also, as you see on the left side, it's called Ethiopic script. So Ethiopians have been using that from early, even I think there were some scripts before Christ, but around the 3rd century, especially after Christianity is introduced, they were using this Ethiopic script, and the one you see on the left is using a Ge'ez language, actually a language which is no longer spoken, but except in the church. It's like a Latin here. Uses this Ethiopic script, but Ethiopic script is also used in current vernacular languages, and that's the one you see in the bottom, the same Ethiopic script, which is written for Amharic. The one you see in the middle is the Ajami, the one we were digitizing, and that is Amharic, but in Arabic script or in Arabic characters. So where I was going with this is, I think Ethiopia brought this competing scripts, the Muslim or the population having, different written tradition, which is there, makes it kind of, compared to other places in Africa, I think it makes it very interesting. I even argue there is even a reverse Ajami in Ethiopia, which is, I think, unheard of, meaning there is a Ge'ez script or this Ethiopic script to write Arabic. There's some documents that I have seen, and but that's for further investigation. Another thing I would like to bring here is that the other thing that has proven is normally this kind of work was done, as I said, with digital scholarship unit of BU libraries and the center and everything. But we're very small, the 3 library. But with this mission that we have proven also, we can add another layer to it. When circumstances allow that, we will be able to, to do this kind of work. So does this mean that, this would be our responsibility? Not necessarily. It'll be, I think it'll be case by case basis, but at least this one has shown, we have, sometimes we can provide the linguistic expertise as well as also the technical, know-how. We have that, and at least we can be a complement. We can play a complementary role. The other, on the lesson side, what I wanted to say is, have we involved a local institution, especially the Ajami scholars, who knows the text and everything, we would have done, maybe the site might be a little bit different, maybe other thing, because as you all may know, not all manuscripts are equal. So the way we prioritize might be a little bit different and so, but at this, this is a very small and mission. So we digitized, whatever we were able to find. And just to add into the first point about Ethiopia being, very focal now for the future, I think we had meeting after we come back with Professor Ngom, and that's I think that he stressed. I think this is what we have done is it shows the tip of the iceberg, but I think with all this complexity and everything, I think a much bigger project can be foreseen in the future. With that, I think I'll pass it to my colleague, Rachel.
Thank you. If you have any difficulty hearing me, just send me a message in chat. So thank you, Gabe. As you mentioned, I'm also a librarian at BU's African Studies Library and will also accompany Gabe to Ethiopia. So firstly, we've listed here some of the people who've contributed to this project, from the planning stages to the post-processing that's going on today. These include our colleagues in both the BU libraries and the African Studies Center. The African Studies Center is an interdisciplinary center on BU's campus, which receives a Department of Education Title VI grant as a National Resource Center for Area Studies. On my next slide, I'd like to speak a bit about my involvement in the project and some of the technical and logistical aspects of putting together this trip. Gabe has already explained the difference in scope between our project and the previous project to Senegal. You can see here a timeline of my own involvement, and you could see that it really wasn't until November 18th of last year that we really had a solid idea that this trip would go forward. In that sense, we were very much dependent on connecting with Mohammed Jawad, who had a really good understanding of the importance and the goals of our project and could connect us to manuscript owners in Ethiopia and with a local coordinator, Ahmed Taib. So it's always better to be prepared as much as possible, but sometimes you also have to go a little bit with the momentum. And after connecting and with these contacts, it was just a matter of nailing down our budget and potential itineraries. Along the lines of planning, I'd like to speak about equipment on the next slide. And so our itinerary included an international flight on multiple airlines, as well as domestic travel within Ethiopia. It was also a small pilot project, so our ground transportation and itinerary were somewhat flexible. Therefore, I determined it would be best if all of my equipment and clothing fit in carry-on luggage. So depending on your own project, that may or may not be a priority, but I did find it's a relief to not have to worry about storing your equipment, losing baggage, etc. So when working on a budget, it's a matter of finding pieces of equipment that are already available to you and then supplementing them. So on the next slide, I have a few pictures of our equipment. I relied heavily on Eleni's past experience and also her extensive documentation, which also took into account guidelines available from the British Library. I will add that a light source is very important. I ordered 2 ring lights, which seemed overkill at the time, and then they weren't delivered on time, and I bought 2 more, and I'll say I did not regret it at all. And on our next slide, another essential element, batteries. So rechargeable batteries, battery chargers, very important when you're doing field work. And I don't have any photos of our setup in action, unfortunately, but this is my practice session. You can see I have It's a Manfrotto 190 Go tripod that allows you to take photographs from above. And if you look at it, you can see an orange bag, which is a counterweight, because when you flip your tripod arm down 90 degrees, it will become unbalanced. So things like that are important to test ahead of time, knowing that when we got to Bahir Dar, we'd have to go and find huge rocks on the side of the street in order to counterweight our tripod. But it can also be difficult to anticipate what you might find in real world circumstances. But one thing I would say is try your best to test yourself and your equipment kind of to its extreme. One thing that I overlooked is that the ring light I ordered, when it reaches the end of its battery life, it appeared when we were in Ethiopia that it would just slowly lose power and strength of light rather than turning off completely. So if I had practiced and allowed my battery to run all the way down, I would have known that ahead of time. So continuing on to our next slide, Gabe has given an overview of the geography. So here I'll show you our two locations. Firstly, this is Bahir Dar. Once we arrived at our hotel, we were lucky enough to be allowed to take over an unused bar. So that was very fortunate and kind of them, but I also wanted to show you that doing photography indoors has its advantages, but you can't assume that you will have a lot of light. And our second location, Hamasit, in this case, we were taking photographs at the home of Sheikh Idris. And in this situation, we were doing outdoor photography, indoor videography. And you can also see on the left, this is our local coordinator, Ahmed Taib. He was instrumental in explaining our project to the community and connecting us with manuscript owners. So it was a very essential part of a successful program. And you can see here, this is a young man who is a student of Arabic who came to see what we were doing. And he knows both Arabic and Amharic. So here we see him learning to sound out and read Arabic Ajami for the first time. So what did we find in photograph? On the next slide, they're primarily religious works from the 20th century in the Amharic language. But through speaking with various people that we met, we know that that's by no means everything that's available in Ethiopian Ajami, either in terms of subject, genre, or language. So the majority of what we photographed were manzumas, that is, chants or songs in honor of the Prophet Muhammad. And that's certainly one of the most recognizable formats in Ethiopia, particularly among people who may not know of Arabic Ajami or who are of all different religious backgrounds. People know them though as recordings, often on cassettes, rather than as written texts. So here you can see the Ajami text on the left and a recording of a portion of that manzuma performed by Sheikh Ismail on the right. So in this example, oops, back one, no problem. In this example, here we go. So that's an example where you can see the manzuma written and as it is intended to be performed. And this was actually amazing for me because I do not know Amharic at all. Gabe was our person on this trip with language experience. I had no idea that singing was about to happen, and then I heard this beautiful voice. So that was a great moment. And if we move on to our next slide, I would like to show you a little bit about the informational interviews that we conducted. So we asked questions about the history of the manuscript, subject matter, age, etc. Here, Sheikh Endris is the owner of the manuscript, but he's also the author of the manuscript. And not only is this interview utilized in creating descriptive metadata, but when we upload the image files to OpenBU in the future, they will be accompanied by this video so that scholars can visit OpenBU and hear from the author himself. And we can play maybe just 20 seconds.
ኦሪጂናል ነው ማለት ነው ቅጂ አይደለም እሱ ያዘጋጁት በራሱ
አይ አረቡን ተርጉሜ ነው
ኦኬ
ነው የዝሮ ሰው ያወጡት ነው እኔ ነኝ
ኦኬ እሱም ግን ጥሩ ኢንፎርሜሽን ነው እንደውም የሚቀጥለውን ጥያቄ እሱ ልጠይቆት ነበር መጀመሪያ ግን በአረብኛ ነው የተጻፈው
So you can see that you can hear from him, from the author himself, but also maybe some of the challenges that Gabe and our intern are having in that they're also turning this into metadata for our institutional repository. So finally, some technical challenges and lessons learned. As I said before, practice your photography at home so that you can do it in your sleep. More accurately, when jet lagged, sleep deprived, or sick, you're testing both yourself and your equipment kind of at extremes so that hopefully you don't have to think about it when you arrive. If you experience technical problems, go through a methodical troubleshooting checklist. So this is probably obvious to many of you who've done projects similar in the past, but it is definitely something that I learned from experience because I could not fix a problem. So I tried changing every single setting, and then I had to go back and try to remember what I changed and change it back. So I do speak from experience, even though it sounds obvious. So also though in field work, you can't plan for everything. So changes and setbacks happen. So try not to let that kind of throw you either in planning, emotionally, etc. As I said, don't underestimate the effects of travel, jet lag, communication and language barriers, etc. But I think the biggest takeaway is to think of every project as an opportunity, as an opportunity to make connections for future projects and collaborations. By embarking on this project as a small pilot, we kind of showed how serious we were. Serious not meaning perfect by any means. As the first trip for both Gabe and myself, we made plenty of missteps, but we demonstrated how we operated in terms of compensating individuals for their time and knowledge, our commitment to access, etc. And it helped us to make connections and collaborations for future projects, potentially on a larger scale involving more people. And with that in mind, I'd like to turn it over back to Eleni for our conclusions.
Thanks, Rachel and Gabe. So really quick, because I understand I'd love to have time for questions. These are just some future opportunities and possibilities for the African Ajami Library. And I'd like to stress that really we just want to engage more with local communities and scholars within Sub-Saharan Africa and continue connecting East and West Africa. If you'd like to read more about some of the work that's been done by Professor Ngom and any guidelines or recommendations for this kind of photography and digitization, I urge you to read these. And so, yes, thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions so far. The first one is, are you providing translations to English translations to the written text? And if so, how are you addressing issues where there's no direct translation for a word?
I'd like to add that I didn't mention it, but there's an NEH grant that the African Studies Center was awarded, a research collaborative grant that's allowing translations and annotations of a sample of the works. So that is going on right now. I think the project is supposed to go on until 2021. and it will be available on the African Studies Center's. They have a specific website for this, and I'm happy to share with whoever is interested.
Thank you. This is a question from Marcy Cohen. Rachel and Gabe, it looks like a manuscript of a sacred song was written in an accounting ledger book. Can you explain why? Was that just a typical readily available notebook? Go Terriers! That was part of the question.
Hi, Marcy. So I think I can speak briefly about that in saying that I think that particular manuscript that we showed was actually just a few pages stapled together. So I'd assume it came from a notebook. We definitely did also digitize a manuscript that was in a day planner where it was copied out in, on random days in a day planner, because that was, presumably what was available. I don't know, Eleni, if you have other comments.
No, I mirrored that as well. We found some that were in planners, in some that used just old like agendas. It was really whatever was available for the individuals to write on, I think, like Rachel said.
Yeah, if I may add also,
Yes.
I think Marcy said that that's the one which is readily available for most. And as we said, these are mostly manzumas, especially praising, the prophet and then everything. So they use, what's, whatever is available, especially for their, day-to-day, chanting and so. That's one answer. The second one is that's another difference that I saw. If you know about Christian manuscript, that's what is different from Islamic manuscript versus Christian manuscripts. The Christian manuscripts we found, you see in that country, they're mostly in vellum and parchment. They use the old materials they use, but and also the purpose. Most of the time, again and again, they were telling us the reason they do that is for the people who does not know, they're not illiterate, they have to pass, that education. So they will use any kind of materials in order to record those information.
I have another question. I'm going to mispronounce location names, so please forgive me. This question comes from Leah Netherstadt, who says, as an Ethiopianist, I would love to hear more about plans for the project in Ethiopia, both in terms of collaboration with ongoing projects that may already be occurring in Harar, H-A-R-A-R, or J-I-M-M-A, and for expansion to other areas, such as Muslim communities near Aksum, A-K-S-U-M. With a sub question, also, do you need help? So I would recommend connecting, but I'll leave the question for you.
Well, I guess I could start to say, yes, we'd love to be in touch. And Gabe may have more to add, but I think one thing is to say we are looking towards more and bigger projects. I'm not sure whether we can say, because a lot of planning happens behind the scenes, what those are just yet, I guess. Does that seem fair to everyone else to say? Like, we're not sure quite what they...
I think I can add, I would like to say, actually Professor Ngom will love to hear from you. So, he is, that's what he was looking for from you, from partners and then everything. So any help he can find, and I know he's, I don't know when it would happen, but I anticipate there will be a bigger project and then ventures toward Harar and Jimma, because they represent another Ajami tradition in another language, which is Oromo, and then other places as well. That's, but it's good to know that another Ethiopian is here, and but if he can provide us that, I think we'll pass it to Professor Falun Gong. He controls that. We don't know when, the next mission it would be.
Okay, thank you. With that, we have no more questions. So thank you very much, Gabe, Rachel, and Eleni.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.